basically I listened to a podcast. Actually,
Hmm.
sorry. I know I'm gonna get off a bunch of tangents, but there's a podcast called American Scandal. And it was,
Yes.
did you listen to
Wondery. Yes. Have you heard me talk? I'm so sorry. This is going fast. Um,
that?
Business Movers. Have you ever listened to that?
I don't
I
think
think
that
I've
I
told
have.
you about it previously. It's like American Scandal, but I couldn't find. Could you find all 5 episodes on Enron?
No, I didn't have time. I was listening to the
Um,
first one and then I was like, okay, I just gotta read an article.
yeah. Uh, but no, that company, Wondery, they do a Business Movers podcast, and it's great. They'll do like 5 podcasts on JP Morgan or Warren Buffett or Exxon Valdez or Disney. The one on Disney was really cool. Uh, Highly recommend. Anyway,
Okay, yeah, I
yes,
will
I did
definitely check
listen to
that out.
that.
Yeah, they made the story actually really cool. And Kate
Hmm.
was in the car when I was listening to it. And then when I was reading the article, she was like, man, we should watch the movie that they created or the
Oh,
documentary they created. I
uh-huh.
was like, you want to watch a documentary about accounting fraud? She was like, well, it sounds interesting. But yeah, so I listened to that podcast and then I read another article on it. Which, by the way, did you see that there's a parody, um, like a parody company, and they have something
Yeah,
called
in
the Egg
Houston, right?
Show? Yeah. And it's just
Oh, that. Yeah.
basically at the bottom they're like, this is just for entertainment purposes only, but then at the top it's like, hey, it's Enron, we're back. Can we talk for a minute?
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah. It's
Um,
owned by like a merch company. So I don't know if this is just like a thing to sell branding, like hey, get your Enron shirt or whatever. But
that would be
yeah,
hilarious. But
some marketers having a fun time with that.
yeah, I don't think it's a real product though. Whatever, it was supposed to be
Right.
like a mini generator or something. Wasn't it like a mini
Nuclear
nuclear
reactor.
generator? Yeah, that's crazy.
If
Anyways,
we're laughing now, in 20 years, we'll actually have it. And I'll be
yeah,
eating my shirt.
that's insane. Um, what were your thoughts on Enron? And I'll give you mine after that.
Um, to me, it seemed like, uh, on top of having people who were willing to hide losses, uh, it was kind of like don't get into trading unless you know what you're doing.
Oh yeah.
Because it sounded to me, I couldn't quite piece the timeline together, but um, one of their big losses was they placed a trade on, I think it was like gas futures. I'm not sure if it was natural gas um, or if it was like gasoline gas. And they lost like $100 million.
That's
And
when it all started.
yeah, that's when it seemed like it kind of
Yeah.
all started. So it was like chasing their tail, trying to make sure that didn't show up anywhere. I don't know. What about you?
Before I talk a little bit more, uh, in that American Scandal podcast, they were like, yeah, and then they lost $190 million and they had an all hands-on meeting. And then they talked about how someone brought up like I think it was fair value accounting, which I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if fair value and mark to market are similar or like the same
Yeah.
meaning or whatever, but then they called Arthur Anderson about it, and Arthur Anderson was like, "Sure, go ahead and create entities and then figure out what their value is going to be in 10 years and then count that value right now. That sounds good." I was
Yeah.
like, "How?" And even they said in American Scandal like
And realize it as revenue.
how is
Like,
it wasn't illegal. How is that not illegal?
yeah,
Like,
I know.
I don't understand.
I
But
suppose regulators are always a step behind, right? Like
yeah,
nobody thought somebody's gonna do this.
how? How do you not think someone's I don't know. But yeah, really I thought it was just crazy how complex they like they were hiding they were using SPEs to like hide losses and just dump assets that were really bad. And then they also, I can't remember who the guy was that was running something. It was like another entity or something like that. And they were forcing him to buy bad, I don't know if it was assets or just like utilities companies or some, or I don't know, energy companies that were had a bunch of losses that weren't necessarily Enron, but like Enron had bought them up and then they were
Mm-hmm.
forcing him to buy them. And then they got
Mm-hmm.
mad at him when he wasn't wanting to buy them and saying that he wasn't loyal. I was like, what? That's they were aggressive. They were obviously very fraudulent, and it was just crazy the culture that Enron had.
Mm-hmm.
Man, that no wonder
I
they
was
did that.
interested to know if it started that way. If what was the CEO's name?
Kenneth Lay.
Kenneth. Yeah. If Kenneth started off meaning well and was just an aggressive personality and then found himself, it's like you tell the one lie, except the one lie was like $100 million, and then you have to follow it up. Um, or if it really was just like fraudulent from the start. That
I
was
mean, I
not
think Jeff Skilling
clear to
definitely
me.
had part in that because
Yeah.
they said he was like super aggressive and
Mm-hmm.
cunning and just would go after people, and he just wanted
I
as
guess
much
we'll
money.
find out because he's doing it again.
What company is
he
he in
apparently
now?
tried to make a LLC. Well, I mean, I think the LLC was made successfully, obviously, but he said that while in prison, he had an idea for um, what was
Take
it?
time
It
to
was
think.
energy, like software or something. I didn't look too far into it, but apparently it didn't go over well. I'm like, yeah, probably about the only way with his. I was thinking the only way that you could kind of convince people that you were not a charlatan now is to never be the front man for a business.
Mm.
Like, be an advisor to a business entity, but absolutely you cannot try to drum up investors because your name is just like totally uh I don't know, blackmailed or blacklisted.
Yeah. So he was supposed to get like 25 years, right? And then he only ended up getting 12.
Yeah, I
How
was half sentenced, so I think it was 24 to 12, which
how does that
is
happen?
almost always the case.
Well, I think it's stupid because like he literally took away the retirements of thousands and thousands of people. And then, I mean, yes, 12 years is a long time, but I don't
I
know.
mean, he's in his, I think he's 72, so he's butting up against male life expectancy. So it's like, are those last 2 years really going to be that great? I don't know.
Well, he's trying to start a company, so obviously he thinks he's going to live longer than 74.
Yeah, true. Or he doesn't know how to do anything else. Kind of like football players when they retire and then try to get on a team again. It's like, well, you've done nothing else for the last 10 years or since you were an adult. So
Yeah.
I
No,
can
that makes
understand that.
sense. Um, I obviously don't do as complicated investing as you do with options and different stuff like that. Do you trade commodities at all? Or
I've not messed with futures. I started to look into it, and the leverage with futures is pretty extreme. Although there are some options now that are not as they're like minis. Um, but things move fast for unknown reasons, and I don't feel like I have a good enough handle to predict direction. And I'm not in it enough to feel confident that I can make a diversified portfolio that is non-directional.
hmm, like the options trading that you're doing now where it's non-directional, you're just getting the,
Right?
you know,
Yeah. Iron condors, iron flies, um, some credit spreads, which are somewhat directional. If you have enough of those and in enough uncorrelated markets, it doesn't matter. But I have no idea what commodities are correlated and what aren't, and have done like zero research into that. But
Can you explain
it
some
would
more
be
what
interesting.
derivatives are, though? Like specifically
Hmm?
what they were doing?
What they were doing,
Yeah.
I, from what I understand, had they basically just speculated on direction. They thought gas was going to spike for whatever reason, um, and so they picked a direction and they bought futures, and then it didn't go in their favor. Which Hershey was the same way. No, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Hershey. They had bought cacao futures, and it did not go in their favor. And I think even Ford did a similar thing with rubber, which is how he came to the conclusion that he needed to just buy up huge swaths of land and own his own rubber sourcing. Yeah, there's enough stories about people losing tons of money in commodities futures that it's like you probably shouldn't play that game unless you've practiced for a long time.
So are basically all companies just, do they just turn into investing companies?
Yes. If
That,
they're successful, they turn into investing companies.
wow.
Uh, there's just not enough places to put money. And especially once you saturated the market, like this is the BlackRock problem. They're running out of places to invest and things to invest in. So they
That,
move into residential real estate. They buy the Suez Canal. I don't remember what I think they're like leasing from the government. I don't remember how that all worked. But yeah, I mean, Facebook, Google, or Meta, pretty much all those massive tech companies, Microsoft, they've all got trading desks that they've got employees whose full time job is trading, and another employee or employees whose full time job is hedging those trades. So
dang.
yeah, they're all investment, and it's sort of oh, what do I mean? It's a perverse sort of investing scheme, not intentionally, but like we're all in the S&P as a generality, and they are all in some derivative that's tied to the S&P. So part of why I went back to Enron, it was such a big problem, is that if you've got a company that's investing and they're in the tech companies, and the tech companies go down, but the tech companies are also invested in the indexes, then it blows everything up.
Yeah, that would be pretty bad. Talk about
They're
your,
leveraged on themselves.
wow. Talk about your thinking in bets and diversification point.
Oh yeah, it's kind of just to follow the train of thought as far as like placing a big trade on a future in a direction without hedging is like so dangerous. Um, and it kind of feeds into portfolio management. And like, it's the Peter Lynch, three of your investments might be a 10 bagger, one might be 100 bagger, and the other six might go bankrupt. But on the whole, you make money, uh, which is definitely not as satisfying as I spent a lot of time researching this one thing. I made a decision, and my decision was all or nothing, 0% or 100%. And now I'm super rich. Um, and sorry, my love affair with Rory Sutherland is going to come through. Um, it reminds me of what he says, where his um assertion is that human reasoning developed in order to win arguments, not to make optimal decisions.
Mm.
So if you want to win argument, then 100% of your money and you turned out to be right makes you 100% right. Unfortunately, the downside is you are 100% wrong. Um, so being 30% right and that 30% is just really good is not as attractive as a whole. I
That
mean, I
makes
think Peter Lynch, when he was at the Magellan Fund, I can't remember. It was like 500 or 1,000 companies he had in his portfolio at one time, like when it got to its largest. It was huge. Um, that may not be the biggest gains that they ever saw, but I think for a while it was his management of it was the largest return they'd ever seen.
wow. Didn't Enron have like 60 billion in assets and just tanked
It
after?
was not clear to me whether it probably was, uh, because I mean they're in utilities, so they had lots of physical assets. But it also was unclear to me how much of that 60 billion was real and
Actual.
how much. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, they talked about how they created I think it was they called it Raptors, and those were the special entities that they would just
Mm-hmm.
pump bad assets into, but then also say that they were worth more than they were because they lost hundreds of millions of dollars a year, but then they were worth positive amounts, which doesn't really make sense. But yeah, so lots of those assets probably were fake.
Right. Did you look into what that was? Like, were they creating additional companies and then putting assets into them and then spinning them off as a different entity? Like, I have no idea what the structure of that was.
Yeah, I think they were different entities. But I don't know if they spun them off or if they just hid them on the balance sheet. Like we have this company, we're calling it fair market value or whatever. Uh, and then they were actually losing tons of money. So I don't know. They were just covering their losses. But
Yeah.
another thing they said was that like on the podcast, they said that Arthur Anderson literally, or maybe it was the article. Anyways, they said Arthur Anderson was like shredding audit documents, which is crazy. No wonder they they weren't able to practice after that. Like that's
Uh,
imagine shredding documents for an audit. That is crazy. And then the SEC got involved and was like, no, you can't
right.
do that.
Yeah. It would be interesting to me to have someone's take on pre and post. I don't remember the legislation they passed because of all the Enron stuff. And
Baines
then,
Oxley.
yeah, Baines Oxley. You probably learned about that when you were getting your CFP.
Well, I
Uh,
got it was a little lower than a CFP. It was a Series 6
oh, okay.
but I can't remember if I did or not.
Well, to the normal person, um, uh, I'd be curious to hear somebody's take on what was it like before 2001 and post that legislation, and how have the regulations changed? Like, could that really happen again in a big way, or is it somewhat limited in scope?
Yeah. Specifically for like accounting firms and them signing off on stuff that's not
Yeah,
illegal but
but
legal,
like
but whatever.
in theory, if you had because I think it still had to be an internal auditor. There's probably some requirement for an external audit, but okay, so say you get an auditor that is totally willing to lie. Could there be an Enron again, or are there enough checks in the system that uh, that would be much more difficult to do?
Yeah,
Not that it sounded easy in the first place.
true. That's why they had to do some complex accounting. I think one of
Mm-hmm.
the things, if I remember right, that Baines Oxley did was say that an accounting firm couldn't also be a consultant to, I mean, they can do the accounting, but they can't be like a separate type of consultant to the company because then
Mm-hmm.
there's kind of a like they're making money as long as the company's alive and they're doing the accounting. So if the company starts going under, they want the company to keep paying them as a consultant too.
Oh,
They want
gotcha.
to lie to keep the company going,
Hmm.
which is bad. Very bad.
Yeah. Is there any downside to that?
To which part?
Yeah. Is there any sacrifice in that as far as not having your accounting firm also be an advisor?
Hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. That'd probably be so specific. It's worth having the legislation in place.
Yeah. So did you do any more research on mark-to-market accounting?
No, I had the same question you had about mark to market versus what was it, true or fair
Fair
value
value.
accounting. Um, and I looked those up, and somewhere at some point somebody had said, "Isn't that great?" Those are my sources. Somebody somewhere um, had mentioned fair market being a form of mark to market.
Mm.
So I wasn't quite sure because, like, when I think mark to market, I think on taxes. If you're actively trading in stocks, you can do I think it's called mark to market, and that gets you around the wash sale rules, where if you buy an asset and then you sell it and then you buy it again in, is it 30 days?
It has to be pretty similar. Yeah.
Yeah. If you do mark to market, you don't have that problem, but you have to realize all non-realized gains December 31st of that year. So there's no like, I'm going to take this thing and I'm going to hold it for 20 years and then I'll realize the gains. You got to do it at the end of each tax year. So it's kind
Dang.
of the downside.
So you just pay more taxes, but you can sell at a loss and then buy the same asset.
Right. Yeah. In theory, uh, well,
Maybe you wouldn't pay more taxes because you can actually take the loss.
right. Yeah. You're, from what I understand, you're betting on the taking the losses, offsetting the long term capital gains that you're not going to get.
Mm. Dang, that's legal. I didn't even know that.
Yeah. But I mean, you got to be an active trader who actually makes money. Because if it doesn't make money, there's no reason to save on the taxes.
True.
Um, of which there's like 1% of those, and that 1% changes over time because people think they've got it figured out, and then they lose money, and turns out it just worked that 1 year or those 2 years.
Dang. That's crazy. I had no idea that you could do that, but it is also very rare for people to actually be doing it, so I can see why it's not.
Yeah,
But I wonder if
there's
someone could
also
ever.
technically there's a provision for active traders where you can get your trades to be preferentially taxed, and I can't remember what the preferential portion is, but you have to be considered an active trader,
Mm.
and that is not a set in stone definition. So you pretty much go by what judges have said on the federal circuit, whether they've allowed people to be active traders or not. And it's pretty stringent. You pretty much have to be doing it every day, like every day for a significant portion of the day. Like it's got to be your real job.
It's got to be your real job. So would
Yeah,
you not be considered an active trader?
I would not, according to the IRS
Hmm.
preferential rules. I mean, it's got to be at least like 4 to 6 hours a day, and it's a gray zone, right? It kind of depends on what a judge says when you get there and how they interpret the description.
Yeah.
So most of the recommendations I've seen are like you need to be trading 4 or more hours every day the market's open, other than vacation or whatever. They need to see it's basically a job.
Wow. That's wild. Yeah, man.
But hopefully, if you're trading that much, it means you're making money too. So then it becomes worth it.
Hopefully.
Yeah. Because they'll actually look at your trades. They'll look at the window of trades each day to see, like, Well, you said you were there for 8 hours, but you only made trades at 9:30, 9:40, and 10:15 every day. So we're not convinced that you're actually doing this all day.
What if you're doing research all the other hours and then you're making trades in those windows because you've researched that those are the optimal windows to make trades?
Yep. I have no idea.
Can you take pictures of yourself at the desk? Like, see, I'm working.
Still here.
Any final thoughts on Enron?
Yeah, don't do that.
I would agree. I would agree.
Seems like a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't trade in the market all the assets of your utility company. Utility companies should probably not be risky.
Yeah. And then don't commit fraud by shredding documents and hiding losses in entities and saying
Or
it's
just
worth
don't
more.
commit fraud.
Don't commit fraud at all. I think that's a good lesson from the whole thing. I think it's just crazy because it's like Enron would be like a huge, like Lilly, Tesla, those huge Amazon, those kinds of companies. Obviously now they're worth trillions, but back then it was 2001 or 90s to 2001 to 2000, whatever. It's just crazy if one of those went down today. Like
Yeah.
it would just
Oh
be
man.
insane. Yeah.
If Amazon went down, I'd be like, yeah, now I got to go to the store.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is a pretty good podcast.